Awesome. Can you see the correct screen? Awesome. Okay, great. At this point, I only have one screen showing, so I can't really see the chat, but Laura and Andrea, if you want to share any questions student ask, thank you so much for doing so. Um, Good evening, everybody. As Laura mentioned, my name is Melody Lim. I use she, her pronouns, and I am from the Career Center. I serve as the Career Specialist for the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. And I mentioned we're from the Career Center. The Career Center is located in Langsdorff Hall, 208, and we are here to support students on their career journey. So things like interviewing skills, finding jobs, building their resume, building LinkedIn, applying to grad school, everything on your career journey, we're here to support you. Today, I'll be focusing on interview do's and don'ts. As mentioned, this will be recorded, and I'll also be sharing the PowerPoint and links and handout as well that I referred to in this presentation. So feel free to take notes or review them afterwards. Mentioned too, if you want to type any questions in the chat, you're more than welcome to. I'll have time to answer questions in the end as well. So I want to make sure this night is for you all to answer all the questions you have on interviews. To get started, I usually like to talk about what we'll be covering today so you all are aware of what will be coming in the next few slides. Some learning objectives, we'll be learning about best practices of what to do before, during, and after an interview, everything in between. It'll be a brief overview of everything just because there's so much encapsulated in interviews. So if you have any questions I don't cover, please feel free to submit those. And also how to best answer common interview questions. So I often get those questions a lot too when I meet with students. So I will be sure to cover some tips based on what I know as well as what I hear from employers. Let's see. Awesome. So first slide is mainly just to make sure we're all on the same page. What is an interview? So some of you may have had interviews, some of you may have interviews planned or have not done an interview before. Regardless, just to make sure we're on the same page. An interview is basically a mutual exchange of information where usually two people meet or it could be more. And these people meet to learn more about each other. So if you're applying for a job or a position, you are meeting with someone to learn more about the position and they're meeting to learn more about you and to see if both parties are a good fit between the applicant and the organization. I mentioned these are usually between two people. However, there are many types of interviews, as many of you may know. Usually you may see one-on-one, you're interviewing with one person. However, you may be interviewing with several people, a panel interview, or maybe you are part of a group interview where several candidates are being interviewed by somebody else. So there's many types. And there are also many different forms nowadays. Usually we think of interviews as one-on-one in-person meetings. However, if interviews are several processes long, it may incorporate a virtual interview where you may be first interviewing with someone over the phone or via Zoom or any video platform. So an interview can look like many different things, which I think contributes to the worries that students may have for interviews because sometimes there's so much uncertainty, and now adding on to what this could look like, it can add to the fears. So it's always helpful if you can to find out what type of interview you're going to be going into so you can better prepare yourself mentally and emotionally and everything before that interview. We'll cover a little bit more as the few slides continue as well. Great. So we're going to be going over like the best practices before, during, and after the interview. And the first section we're covering is before the interview. So I have a few engagement points for you all. The first, if you are comfortable, I wanted to ask the audience, students, what do you do to prepare for an interview? So right now, you're welcome to type in the chat if you're able to, or unmute your mic to share what you commonly do to prepare for an interview. Oh yeah, I can open the chat. I see. Look up elevator pitch on Google works for me. Awesome. That's definitely a good way to prepare for interviews because oftentimes when they ask, tell me about yourself, it's similar to an elevator pitch where you're giving a brief description of who you are and what you're looking for. Awesome. I see several practice answers. Great. As well as researching the position and the company. Very good to know before you're entering the interview. Practicing with someone else, definitely another component to that. Practicing ourselves can be helpful, but when you get here, when you help someone else interview, it helps them get feedback and they may notice things that you don't notice as you're interviewing and practicing yourself. So thanks for sharing that. Websites that you're applying to, great. So websites including of the organization, their mission, maybe social media accounts that these organizations have can be really helpful to get a sense of who they are and what types of people and environment you may be working in. Cynthia mentioned take a few deep breaths, much needed. Continuing to breathe can definitely regulate our whole body system. So remembering to breathe. Do a mock interview with a friend or family member. Yes, definitely someone you trust, because these things can be very uncomfortable, especially even practicing with someone we trust. So finding someone who can give constructive feedback can be helpful. And if you feel comfortable, I'll also share resources at the Career Center where we help students with practice interviews as well, in case you'd like some feedback. So, and additional resources too. So thank you all for mentioning that, all good feedback and ways to prepare for an interview. So I just wanted to gauge what you all do and what you may be doing in the future as you prepare for interviews. I'll share a few more tips too that would be helpful to consider when you're preparing for interviews. Oftentimes it may require self-reflection. This is really crucial because when you're interviewing, you're sharing more about yourself. And this is to motivate the employer to potentially hire you or invite you for the next round of interviews. And that self-reflection may incorporate things like your interests. So what your goals are, what you're interested in, why you're interested in the company and the position, skills and experiences, especially because oftentimes you may be applying for jobs where you don't have 100% of the job description, but you may have transferable skills and experiences that you can bring into the job. So for example, you may have experience in the food industry or retail where you think, oh, it's not really related to this position. However, you may be taking things from those positions like working in fast-paced environments, working with diverse populations, mediating conflicts with customers, which can be transferable into the next step of your career. Other things that are mentioned on the screen, abilities, your educational experiences, if you've done anything in the classroom or specific projects you want to highlight for this job or position, and other transferable skills that can be helpful for the position. So when I mention transferable skills and job description, I really want to emphasize that using the job description to prepare for an interview is really key. And it's also helpful for you later on as you may be attending resume workshops. Using job descriptions can help you tailor your resume to the job you're applying for. So when you're interviewing, you're not only answering the question, but you're telling the interviewer some stories about yourself. And by telling stories, you're giving them proof of examples of when you use these skills, so they can more vividly imagine you using those skills in the job that they're hiring for. So telling stories can really move people, which is why oftentimes humans gravitate towards storytelling, entertainment, documentaries, because they're told in story formats where we learn so much. So your storytelling will be really important. So as I mentioned, job description, I took a screenshot today of a sample job description to highlight how you can use a job description to prepare for interview questions. So this is a sample job description of a human resource customer support position. So supporting humans and human resource. And this is for NASA, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So I only screenshotted the qualifications, but you can definitely look at the whole job description. I highlighted a few things that if I were to apply for this job, I would highlight and prepare stories for these questions. So for example, the qualifications for this human resource customer support include like 3 years of human resource administration experience, detail-oriented organizational skills. So as I'm highlighting these things, I would also write these down and come up with stories where I use detail-oriented or organizational skills. An example of my time prioritizing and coordinating multiple assignments. An example of myself using communication skills that were customer-focused. Because oftentimes when they're putting these qualifications, it's because they want someone who has some of these skills, maybe 60% of these skills. So I want to be prepared in that sense to be able to give these stories if they were to ask that. This is how I often practice, and I'll share with you all a handout that can be helpful as you are preparing for that too. So this is how you can use a job description. I did not go over a whole job description, but this is how I would highlight and come up with some stories, and I'll show you a method how you can format those stories in the next few slides as well. So those are a few things to do before. Some of the ones you mentioned as well, you all mentioned researching the employer, so the organization you're applying for, and this can be done in many different ways. Some of you mentioned their websites. This may also look like mission statements. So what are they valuing and prioritizing in their organization? Do their values and goals align with what you see for yourself in your career or your next steps? Maybe looking at reports, especially looking nowadays as you see a lot of stuff about layoffs, looking at the reports and seeing how long these companies have been in the field. What is the trend looking like for their hiring and also layoffs? Also looking at their social media sites. So if this company has like Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook, looking at them to see what kind of engagement they have with their consumers or their audience, and also seeing if that relates to stories you hear from people who work there. Other tools I'd recommend not to forget too, one of them is Glassdoor, which is a website you can use to find reviews about a specific company from actual employers or employees. So for example, when I was searching for jobs, maybe I looked for Cal State Fullerton. I may look at Glassdoor to look at how people have reviewed Cal State Fullerton as a place of work, as well as how people may review the salary that they make. So I can type in the job I'm applying for and see how much on average they make based on employee feedback. But generally, I would use many different websites to determine and gauge what I'm applying for. Glassdoor also allows current and past employees to submit interview questions they had when they were interviewing. So I would say use Glassdoor just to see the types of interview questions there are so you can prepare answers for them. So, great. I see. I always look through Glassdoor, great website for preparing before interviews. I definitely agree. LinkedIn is another one, a professional networking site, and your network can be really helpful too. So any friends, family, professors, people you know that have worked there, sometimes they may be willing to share more insider information that you can't find online. So it doesn't hurt to let your network know. Though I know the caveat of that too is to be vulnerable that you're on the search and you're looking for something. So it's really up to you how you find it helpful. In my past, when I looked for jobs, I definitely try to find someone who I know work there, or ask around or find on LinkedIn someone who may be an alumni who worked at the place I'm applying for, or maybe someone who I know someone who knows someone, and try to reach out to them. Though oftentimes the job search process and the interview process can be a very energy expediting or energy spending. So it just depends on how much time you have in between your application and how many interviews you have and how much energy you have left to reach out to people. So these are some suggestions, and feel free to, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to continue typing them in the chat as well. So that's just a brief snippet of before the interview. We're going to move on to during the interview, which is the next portion. So you got the interview, you've prepped. What are the next steps of things you should be aware of? Dress is always one question I have from students, and it really depends on the industry you're applying for. However, the dress and attire you have, I'd recommend wearing professional clothing that's appropriate for your field. You want to make sure you wear something that's comfortable, not something that's super tight or uncomfortable, because interviews may be uncomfortable situations in the first place, and what you wear can really help you feel more at ease when you're going through this sometimes stressful process. You may want to research what the company dress code is and ask professionals in the industry about the attire recommendations. Oftentimes these may be business formal, business casual, depending on the industry's, depends on what you're applying for. However, some things you want to avoid may be strong perfume or cologne, heavy makeup, or casual clothing. Even though the people at the organization may be casual, wearing jeans and whatnot, for your interview, you just want to dress to impress because you don't have the job yet. So you just want to show that you are respectful and that you're professional. And a few resources on campus that can be helpful as you're thinking about career clothing on campus. One of them is Tuffy's Career Closet, which is a part of Tuffy's basic needs. So at Tuffy's Career Closet, which include clothing that are donated, and these are gently used or new clothing donated by faculty and staff. So this is all in the career closet, and students are able to take up to 6 free clothing items per month. So every month, you could take six. It can build your closet really well, especially since career clothing can be expensive. And examples of clothing here could be blazers, shirts, blouses, pants, skirts, ties. So I definitely see a rotation of them, and these are always helpful just to look through in case you just want to slowly build them. I know for me, if I ever buy clothing, I try to think about, can I wear this at work? And also, can I wear this casually? That's something that I think about. You don't have to think about it, but sometimes I try to think about the dual purposes of the pieces I buy. So definitely, I would have appreciated a career closet back in undergrad. So if you are interested, it's located in MH. So McCarthy Hall, 143, and they're generally open 8 to 5 p.m. So check that out. This PowerPoint will have links as well to these resources on campus I'm referring to. And also, I know for the LGBTQ plus resource center, they also have a gender affirming closet at times. So I'd recommend checking out their link to see when the next one is open. These could be career clothing, but they also may be casual clothing too, in case you're interested. They are located in PLS, the Pollock Library, in room 180. So this is a little bit on clothing. We can definitely talk further if you have specific questions for your interview. I'm going to be going into interview questions, which is a bulk of what I worry about, and also a lot of students tend to worry about too. And for interview questions, you don't necessarily need to know the type of them, but these are some examples of different types of interview questions. So some of them may be behavioral, where you give an example. So they're asking for example of a problem you solved. So I'll be going over a behavioral method of how to answer questions. Oftentimes it's really helpful to tell stories, as I mentioned earlier. So we'll focus on this one in the few slides next. Open-ended questions, these may be really what they're trying to gauge your thought process and your sometimes your deduction, your critical thinking skills. This one is an example here. They ask, discuss 2 factors that are most important to you in a job. So this could be really open-ended. How you answer it can reflect the research you've done related to their position and what you're applying to, as well as your self-awareness, and also connecting it to these 2 factors may be the most important to you, and also experiences and factors where you've utilized in the past too. Technical questions tend to be ones where they ask you to perform something. So this could be solving a problem using a software, or it could be you problem solving or creating an ad campaign in the spot, or working in a group to present something. So it has you do something. Probing questions may be more deep. They want to know a little bit more. So ones could be, how would you evaluate your last boss? And this is something I'll mention later on in the interview don'ts. When they ask you questions like these, you want to avoid negative remarks. You want to focus more on what you learned from your last boss, for example, and what you're looking forward to in a new supervisor. So try to focus on more positive examples of how you would answer these questions versus saying bad things about previous bosses or bad things about your previous job, because it can look bad on your behalf. And also they may think, oh, like, what if something happens here? Like, will they talk about us this way as well? What does this person look like? So just try to think about ways you would reframe answers. So diving a little bit deeper now, those are some types of interview questions. Laura had given me some good feedback about some questions that may be helpful for you all to know a little bit about the behind the scenes. So these are some common interview questions that they may ask. Oftentimes they will ask, tell me about yourself. And this is where one of you all mentioned that you practice your elevator pitch, which can be helpful for this first question, because this is the one that will set the tone for the rest of the interview. So when they ask, tell me about yourself, you want to give a concise description of yourself that shows you're the right fit for the job. And generally you can use the rule of present, past, and future. So you don't want to give your whole life story in this. In general, interview answers, you want to spend about 2 minutes, not too much more answering it, because as you may know, when someone talks for a long time, people tend to lose interest. So you want to make sure to answer the question succinctly, but also enough details, which can definitely take practice, which is helpful for practicing with someone. I wrote an example answer here. So if you are a current student, you may mention some things of present. So maybe your education, your current position. You could talk about your past related positions and also what you're looking forward to for the future for this opportunity or position. So I'll read what I have here. This person wrote, I'm currently a senior at California State University Fullerton who will be graduating with a bachelor's in psychology this May. I'm a behavioral technician at Lilly Health, where I've been working with adolescents with developmental disorders for 1.5 years. Although I enjoy my role, I'd love to support students transitioning into college, which is why I'm excited to interview for this position as a college support specialist. So something like that. Doesn't have to be too long. I don't talk about where I'm born or where I've been living for the past few years. It's not as relevant to what they want to know, which is who am I? Maybe what is my educational background, my relevant skills and experiences. And maybe if you want to start off with what you're excited for applying for this position, that's great as well, because it shows that you're excited, you're transitioning or applying for this position for a certain reason. This is just one example. You can definitely tailor it to your own style. You can use the techniques you feel is right for you. Right, so the next slide, we'll be talking about oftentimes too in the beginning or end, they may ask you, why are you applying for this position? Or why do you want this job? What do you know about this company or this position? So this is a question they ask because they want to know if you've read the job description, if you know about their company, if you've done your research, and how are you going to connect the dots between why you want this job and how you're a good fit for the job. So in this kind of question, you want to make sure to identify key factors that make you a great fit, as well as share why you're interested in this job and company. So always connect the dots whenever possible. You don't want to leave it for the interviewer to connect the dots, because I think it makes a lot of sense in our heads, but sometimes it doesn't make sense when we say it. So you really want to practice connecting the dots for them. So this is an example connecting it from the previous, tell me about yourself. So this person wrote, in addition to my role as a behavioral technician, I was also a psychology peer mentor where I supported college students in getting acclimated to the major, campus resources, and potential career paths. I learned I really enjoy working with underserved college students, which is why I was excited to see the College of Rising Corp's position and its mission to support underserved communities and increase access to blah, blah, blah. So as you can see for this one, this person mostly focused on themselves and their experiences and connected it to the position they're applying to, what they read from their mission, what their purpose was, and probably will continue a little bit more about why they're interested in this job and company. So it takes practice. Try to focus on showcasing your skills and experiences while also answering the question and connecting the dots for the interviewer of why you're applying and why you're a good fit. It's so much easier writing these examples than actually being in the interview and saying them, so practice really helps. Didn't realize I italicized this. So the next question, they may ask things like, oh, what are your greatest strengths? Or what are your weaknesses or areas of improvement? Questions such as that you may have had in the past. So this one tends to be a tricky one because you can come off the wrong way when you say cliches like I'm a perfectionist or I'm a workaholic and things like that. I have this link that I'll be sharing with all of you too on common ways to answer this question. There's many different routes. However, the main things, if they're asking about your weakness or area of improvement, you want to identify an area of improvement. So just be specific. You want to give a short example, if possible, of when the weakness affected your work, because the next part is really important. You want to focus on how you've been growing in that area. So you don't want to just talk about your weakness. You also want to show them that you've been working on growing from it. So it's not as much of as a weakness and it's something you've been working on. So this really shows your self-awareness and your honesty, and also how much thought you've been putting into it as well. This person wrote, this is not related to the past two questions. This is just another example. This person wrote, I tend to get caught up in the little details, which can distract me from the ultimate goal. So when I was at a junior web designer at Harold's Hats, I was asked to revamp our size guide and make it more fun and visually interesting. Unfortunately, I became so fixated on finding the perfect font that I missed the deadline. These days, I break each project down into mini tasks, each with their own deadline. If I spend too long on in an individual thing, I set it aside and move on to the next one, because usually when I come back to the imperfect piece, I can be more objective about whether or not it needs more work. So this is a great example of the person mentioning the specific area of improvement, being too caught up in the little details. This is another way to reframe like you're a perfectionist. This one gets more specific and then also details how this person has been working to grow in this area of improvement with vivid examples from their past experience. So when you give a story, it helps them visualize and help them see you versus just listing a lot of different things. So this is just one way of how you can tackle this area of improvement question. And if you all have other tips, you can definitely share in the chat as well. So this is the next slide. We're going to focus on the STAR method. This one I feel definitely elevated my interviewing skills a lot. I used to just answer the question and be done, because when they ask you like, oh, tell me about it, have you ever solved a problem before? And I could definitely answer yes, like I have solved a problem before, and end it, and that'd be answering the question. But if I gave an example where I solved a problem, that can definitely help them imagine how I solve problems and how I may solve problems in my future candidate position. So the STAR method will really help. And the STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So you can use the STAR method for almost any type of question, because when you tell a story, you can format it in this method. So for example, maybe they asked you a time you had to work on a team. You would want to describe a specific situation and task. So maybe there's a time where I worked in a group for a class project, and we were tasked to do equal parts of this writing project. Unfortunately, the task that happened, one of the group mates was not contributing enough to their project. So the next part, which is the one you want to focus on, the action and result. Action, I talked to this person. I made sure they were okay. I delegated tasks. So as you can tell, I used a lot of I statements. It's okay if you collaborated and work with someone else, but in the action, they really want to see your action and your role in this situation, and also the result. Like, what was the outcome? What did you learn? How will this situation in problem solving help you succeed in problem solving for your future role? So that's how you can format your answer when you tell a story. If you forget, you can think, okay, I need to do a STAR answer. So STAR, so you can say the situation I had, the task was, the actions I took, the result was. So you can even use those words maybe to remember what this method is. And as you tell stories, it will be a little bit more easier to structure in this way. But if you've ever had to tell a story and you forgot what the question was, it's probably because you spent too much time in the situation and task. A lot of people tend to give a lot of details that may not be relevant and then forget the question. So I'd say give about 70% of your answer focused on action and result, because they do need to know like, oh, maybe you worked in this place for this position, the trouble was this, but they really want to focus more on what your actions were, what skills you used, and then what the results were. So the good rule of thumb is 30% at S&T, situation and task, and then 70% on action and result. Won't apply everywhere, but this is that's what I use, rule of thumb in my 2-minute answer. Most of the time I want to spend on action and result. So this is another example of the STAR method being used. This person is asked to describe a situation where you completed a task successfully. And this person, they mentioned their situation task. I was asked to develop a new electronic filing system to replace the papers at blank role. And then action result, you can definitely see here, there's a lot more information included in action result. So I developed an Excel spreadsheet to log which files existed, and then prepared new electronic forms to replace the old forms. The result was the customers are now able to update the information online without filling out a new form each time. All files were updated. Customers expressed being more satisfied. So that's the end. So that's how you can answer a STAR in the STAR method. And if you wanted to even add a little bit more, you can talk about how this will prepare you to complete tasks in your new position, or connect it a little bit more to what you'll be doing in the future. So again, I mentioned this is one of the most important pieces of conducting interviews well. And so with some guidance from another career center, I created this handout that I'll be sharing with all of you. It's called the STAR Method Interview Practice. This is mainly what I talked about earlier. However, the handout just gives an example of what behavioral interview questions are, reminder of what STAR stands for, and it has different kinds of themes of interview questions. So I mentioned teamwork, problem solving, organization. It tells you a question for teamwork. Tell me about a team project that you worked on. You can use this worksheet. It's an Excel worksheet, or you can print it out. You can write out what your STAR answer would be. You could do that with problem solving, organization. It's a 2-page handout. You don't have to fill it all out. However, as I mentioned earlier, when I looked at the job description, highlighted skills you're looking for, those skills can serve as themes for the interview questions. So these are some skill themed interview questions where you can practice just writing different stories. You can even use the same story for teamwork, problem solving, organization if you're able to add on to that same story. But sometimes people tend to use other stories because it can showcase more of their skills or other parts of positions they want to highlight. So this handout I'll be sharing, hoping this can be helpful. You can always bring it to the Career Center and we can practice interviewing as well. As we're talking about questions they may be asking, these are questions that employers should not be asking in interviews, and it may depend on the state as well, specifically on past salary in California. I think 2017, there was something passed where now in interviews, they can't ask you about your past salary. However, questions that may revolve around salary may sound like, what are you expecting to make in your next job? Or what kind of expected salary do you have? Where they may ask you what you expect, and it's kind of showing that you've done your research and also trying to make sure you're not wasting your time and wasting their time, because if you're expecting something much higher than they're able to offer, then it may not be worth your time to continue the interview. So that's why they ask those questions too, among maybe other reasons. Additional questions they should not be asking because it may not be relevant to what you're applying for could be things like national origin and citizenship. However, for federal government positions, even in their resumes, they may ask you to include citizenship status as well as like if you're a veteran, military affiliated. So it depends on the type of roles you're applying to. Other things they usually shouldn't ask are age and marital family status, personal things like weight and height. Some of these things may be relevant if you're applying to be a model. They may ask weight and height, ask you to submit a picture. So that may be different. They usually shouldn't be asking about your disabilities, arrest record, military, etc. So these are like general things, though sometimes depending on the job you're applying for, they may be asking those. Okay, the questions in the chat. I got asked if I was legally born here at the job fair. Of course, I wasn't born here, but for those that aren't, I suggest what roles are available to work for non-citizens. Yeah, so I'm sorry about that. Generally, the employers who attend fill out a form about what kinds of individuals, like what status, if people who are applying, like what kind of roles they have. That's definitely a better question to ask. And if you have any concerns, feel free to reach out to me and we can definitely get to the root of it as well to make sure it doesn't happen to other students. How would you go about if an employer asks any of the questions they shouldn't be asking? Because it definitely happens. That's a great question. So now knowing questions that generally employers shouldn't be asking, it may be a matter of, oh, can I ask, how is this question related to the position? Or like maybe trying to ask a way for seeing why they're asking the question to see if it's relevant, and then proceeding cautiously about how much you want to disclose or you're comfortable disclosing. Oftentimes it may be seeing how you can answer it and then deciding not to continue with the interview or application process of the position. Those are some ways to go about it. But I know it's oftentimes hard to plan ahead because I think oftentimes when they ask you, it kind of throws you off. So just see what you're comfortable with. Understand there's a power dynamic too when you're interviewing with someone. So just try to see how you would try to see how they're asking and also how much you're comfortable sharing. Why are questions asked about military and your criminal record when applying for a job? Good question. A lot of times when you're submitting applications, it may be part of the human resource application portion where they're asking you about various things like your military status and criminal record. Some positions, unfortunately, if you have a criminal record, you may not be able to apply for the job. And sometimes when they're asking about military status, it may be because there is a feature where they're giving a little bit more, not benefits, but more so like, oh, like if you're military connected, you may be put in this pile because it may be advantageous to have a military status. So those are some reasons why they're asked is when the application portion. However, in the interview, it's generally not looked highly upon if they're asking that. To avoid any background checks, can you probably ask if they e-verify for those who aren't citizens or residents? Yeah, usually on the job descriptions, they will mention if they require background checks. And also you can ask those questions as well. Verify for those who aren't. Yeah, it would be best to, especially if you know your circumstances, to assess whether the individual organization hires individuals of different statuses and get to know that information before submitting the application, just so it saves your time as well. Ooh, thank you all for your questions. And if feel free to, I'll include my email in the end if you have further questions. And if I find out any more information, I'll definitely share with you all as well. Okay, so additional interview don'ts I wanted to highlight. So I'll mention a few things that people may say in interviews and why it's recommended that you don't. So first one, sorry, I'm so late or so early. And then the first one's like self-explanatory. You don't want to be late for an interview. However, you don't want to be super early to an interview as well. You can get early to the place. However, you may not want to go to the lobby like 30 minutes or an hour before because you're just waiting in the lobby for an hour. They may have previous interviews they're doing, or they may be doing other stuff. So they may feel a little bad that you've had to wait for an hour before your interview. So if you get there really early, you can walk around or be in your car just so you know you're on time, but you don't need to go super early to the actual waiting room or check in. Maybe check in about 15 minutes beforehand, just so you have enough time in case they have any paperwork or other things for you to do before. Next one is, I know I don't have much experience, but blah, 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 blah. So I think this happens a lot for students who may not have a lot of experience. I think oftentimes it's not common for us to share great things about ourselves. We're taught to be humble, and sometimes we want it, when we say these things, like I know I don't have much experience, it kind of highlights more of what we're lacking versus what we are bringing. So I'd say try not to focus on what you're lacking. Think about the skills and experiences you are bringing and connect it more to how that can still help you be successful in the position you're applying for. Oftentimes a lot of times you don't have to have 100% of the job description to apply. I would say general is like 60%. You want to have 60% of what they're looking for and still apply and go for it, because a lot of times you can be successful even if you don't meet all the requirements. So try not to focus on what you're lacking, focus on what you do have. The next one, avoid filler words like, so in common like speaking with each other, we may use a lot of filler words. However, in interviews, you want to try to avoid like, etc. Next one, if you are asked a question like, oh, have you ever had a situation where you had to say something difficult to your boss and you never did? You want to avoid saying, I don't know, or I never had to talk to my boss about something difficult, because it just ends it there. You want to think about, okay, I never had it personally. However, if I did have a situation where I had to tell my boss something difficult because we had a sense of disagreement, I would go about it like this and this and this. That's a more effective way of answering that question, because you're answering it, of course, but you're also creating a scenario where you're answering it, and it kind of benefits you because you kind of know how to answer it in that situation. So never say, I don't know, I never had it. However, try to see how you would go about it, because that shows your critical thinking skills and also shows the skills you have if you ever had to encounter that situation. So the next one, this kind of was highlighted in the previous slide. So this person is about to speak negatively about their company. So try to avoid speaking negatively about past companies or past bosses. Even if you've had those are very valid. However, you just want to focus more on what you learned from the situation. So I learned a lot from my past company. However, for my next company that I work for, I'm looking for a company that blanks and blanks and blanks. So more future focus and more positive, not bashing on anybody. Last but not least is when they ask in the end, oh, do you have any questions for us? Avoid saying that you don't have any questions, because this is, again, an opportunity for you to exchange information. And for most of the interview, you probably were exchanging information about yourself. And this is a chance for you to learn about the company. So you really want to use this, because sometimes this might be your only chance to learn about them, like from them, before they offer you an acceptance or rejection. So use this as an opportunity to learn more about the company, about what you're getting yourself into. So this leads me to my next slide on common questions that you may be asking in the end. Cool. Thanks, Caleb. Definitely going to be sharing some examples. So before I share some of my examples, I want to hear from you all, because so many of you have varied experiences. What type of questions do you typically ask the interviewer after the interview? So they ask you, oh, do you have any questions for us? What are some types of questions you generally ask? So you can type in the chat, or you can unmute your microphone. I'm gonna take a sip of water first. Right, I see a few questions so far. Okay. Well, let's start off with the few. I see, what are the hours? I think that's a valid question to ask. However, when you're asking questions at the end, you want to avoid asking questions you may be able to find on their website or job description. So sometimes the job description may list like, oh, this is an 8 to 5 job with some evenings and weekends. However, maybe a reframe of that question, what are the hours, could be, can you tell me what a typical week looks like? What does that look like for the new employees? So that kind of will answer like what type of hours there are, especially if you can't find it on the website. Any incidents between coworkers? So that's a good question too, to see like what kind of environment you're in. So maybe reframing that to what is the team environment like? If someone has left this position, can I ask why they left the position? So maybe you want to see if people are leaving for certain reasons. That can kind of see what the environment is like there. What is the team environment like? How much does it pay? That can be great too, especially if it's not listed on the job description, but hopefully it is, like the pay range. Or sometimes though, people recommend that the salary conversation happens when the offer happens. So hoping that information is something you know already when you're applying. How would you describe your management style? Right. So that definitely helps you understand like your supervisor and who you'd be working with. 401k, I think that's great as well. Though I know a lot of individuals may save their retirement and the benefits and the salary conversation for when you're offered it. It could be a question you ask when maybe you're thinking about applying for a job, you know someone who works there. It could be a question you ask someone who's not affiliated with the interview. However, when this is like the first interview and you don't have the offer yet, it may not be the best time to ask that kind of question. Okay, what can you offer to me as my employer? Does the company providing benefits? Like you mentioned that. Maybe what can you offer to me as my employer? Maybe you're asking about like training or professional development, support as people move up the ladder. So maybe be a little bit more specific there. Like, oh, what are some professional development opportunities, or how do you support your employees to grow in their profession? So just reframing it that way, so it's a little bit more professional and they understand what you're asking for. Because when I hear what can you offer to me as my employer, it seems very direct, and I understand what you're asking, but maybe in another way could be better. Great. When would they get back to me? So great knowing what are the next steps in the process, how long could I expect to be waiting before I hear back is always a good question. And then ask their names again and ask what's the amount of work expected to see if hired, right? So definitely, hopefully they told you their names at the beginning. So if you have like a notepad, you can write down their names so you can refer to them, address them when you're answering questions. It's okay to ask it again if it was not heard. Definitely good to ask again, especially if you plan on writing a thank you email or thank you note, which I'll mention later on. And then last question I see, what's the amount of work expected to see if hired? I think that's great too, because it sets your expectations. So maybe a way you can ask that would be, what are the expectations within the first 30 or 60 days for the newly hired candidate? So then you can see, okay, within the first month, they expect me to do this. So maybe I can also ask what kind of training or onboarding is there to help me get to those expectations within that 1 month. So those are some ways. You all had great questions and very great things that you want to know as you're assessing these jobs and positions. So I think you all are on the right track. Sometimes maybe a little bit of reframing how it's worded. So all of you mentioned a lot of positive future focused questions that incorporate you in the company. So that includes like the company's management style and culture. Why do you enjoy working here? What have past employees done to succeed in this position? So some questions that are positive future focused. Some of you ask questions on next steps of the process. So when should I expect to hear back? And some of you also fell under this category, which I call questions based on your values and or fears and hopes. Could be labeled other things. So what I mean by that is that maybe in the past, you had a very micromanaging supervisor. So you kind of want to ask, what is the next supervisor's style like? For me, I worry that I'll be thrown into something without any training. So I usually ask a question on like, oh, what is your onboarding process like? Or what is the training like for newly hired candidates? And that expectation question can fall really well here. Like, what are expectations within the first month? And what is the training like to support individuals? Or maybe you're very interested in growing with the company or just growing professionally. So making sure to ask that. So that can be even a slight benefits question, but more so focused on professional development. Maybe you really hope to work in an environment that's very culturally sensitive, very social justice oriented. So maybe I know in the past for interviews I've had in universities, I ask like, what does social justice or diversity mean to your department? And what kinds of initiatives do you have to support blank and blank? So think about what's important to you, what you really hope for your next position, what you hope to avoid for your next position, and then try to ask questions based on that. So all of these questions can help you decide, as well as let the employer, the interviewer know that you're interested in this position, that you want to learn more. So always ask questions when possible. Right. Thank you all for participating, by the way. I appreciate your engagement and your answers in the chat. And we're all learning together. We're going to end with the after the interview portion, which is also very important. The interview doesn't have just end at the end of the interview. There's still after things that I'd recommend doing. Two things would be, if you can, even just reflecting, you could write it down, because I usually have a Padfolio where I wrote notes down from the interview, and then I journal or make a pros and cons list. So I had a pros and cons list in mind before I interviewed, and after this interview, I probably learned a lot more about this company. So I would probably put a pros and cons list of the company, and also detail questions I had trouble answering, because I always have interview questions where I feel like I could have answered that better. But if I wait till the next interview to remember that, I won't remember how I could have answered it better. So I usually write down like questions that were really hard, and then try to think about better answers for next time if I'm asked that same question. What did you learn from this interview? Right. The number 2 thing I'd recommend after an interview, always send a brief thank you note or email within 24 hours. Not everyone does this. However, it's really, really appreciated by people who interview. And when I say thank you email, like you don't have to write an actual note and give it to them. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes you're out of state. Maybe it's just a virtual interview, especially those phone and virtual interviews. You can't really give them something within 24 hours unless you drive there, or those things. However, emails are always helpful because it shows that you appreciated their time. You're looking forward to hearing back, and it's just a nice gesture. these are things that the thank you letter or email should include. So again, succinctly highlight your interest in the role with the company. I usually mention something that I remember that person saying. And before I continue, each thank you email and note, it's to each individual interviewer. It's not one email to all 3 interviewers because you want to make it personal. And I think it's better to make it individually personal. So that's why when I'm writing these thank you emails, I mentioned something that interviewer said that I appreciated. So it kind of helps them remember me and also the conversation we had. This doesn't have to be very long. Could just highlight, I really think with my education and in my experiences with career counseling, I think I'll be a good fit with this blank and blank company. So nothing new, nothing that you haven't said in the interview. So that's why the should not part, you don't have to go into details. You don't have to raise new questions of things you never brought up that weren't even in your resume. So just a brief thank you email to the person. And you may be thinking, how do I even get the contact information? I went through so much. Usually it'd be helpful to either get their business card in the end or ask their front desk person. I usually ask like, oh, can I get their business card or the contact information of these individuals? Or I try to ask them in the end, like some of you mentioned asking their names. You can ask their names and contact information because you'd like to send them a thank you note afterwards. So definitely okay, definitely acceptable, but try to send a thank you email when possible. Thinking about all the people they interview, some people sending thank you notes can make a difference. Or at least, even if you don't get the position, they remember fondly of you and maybe think of you for other positions. Okay, so that is the end of my end after interview. I went through a lot of content and it takes time to process. So I hope rewatching the video, looking at the slides, using the handout can be helpful. As I mentioned, I'm from the Career Center, so we do have a lot of resources on all parts of the career journey, but specifically for interviews, you can utilize 2 different things at the Career Center. So you can attend workshops focused on interviewing. You can also schedule a practice interview. So we have the Career Center staff at the Career Center that are always prepared to do practice interviews. When you set up an appointment to do a practice interview, we usually ask students to send us their resume and potential job description or just type of job you're applying for. That way we can tailor these questions. So when you come in person or virtually, we ask you these questions as a test run, and then we go over some feedback. For me, I usually take notes while the student is talking so I can show them different things they mention and we can talk about how we can improve it and also use different resources as well. So you can definitely use the Career Center. It's here for you as a student. You can definitely speak to your friends and family. They're also helpful too. So just depends on your preferences. Also, you can utilize Interview Prep, which is our online interviewing software. So this is free for all CSUF students. This is a software where you can just enter your account and then it will have set questions for you that you can select. And after you select it, it'll count down 3, 2, 1 and ask the question. Then it'll allow you to answer it and you can review your interview. So it'll go like that. So it's similar to if you were to do your own interview with your phone, but this is more so set questions that you can practice and you can watch it as well. So these are 2 ways, depends on what you like, but these are some resources at the Career Center focused on interview. Before I end, just want to highlight some upcoming events at the Career Center in case y'all are interested. This is Women's History Month. National Women's Day is National International Women's Appreciation Day, so great. There's a Women Tell All career version panel next week. There's also a workshop focused on LinkedIn, a professional networking site, so how to start it, what is it, and how you can design your profile. Next 2 are some that I'm hosting. So navigating the workplace as APISA individuals. APISA stands for Asian Pacific Islander South Asian American individuals. So because next month is Asian Pacific Islander South Asian American Heritage Month. So we're celebrating a little early because we have some series. Also, careers in government panel. If you're interested in working with the government, we're having a few panelists come to share insight information and also how to apply for those positions. So these are just like 4 of the workshops coming in the next few months. Great. And then this is I have a list of all our spring fairs, but we only have 2 more left. So these are career fairs where they may be focused on jobs and employers hiring for specific fields. So next one is Teacher Job Fair, which is next Tuesday. And then the one in April is Internship and Career Expo, which is more general with all types of fields. Career fairs are in person in Titan Student Union. And usually this is a bunch of employers with booths in the room, and you're able to walk around to see what types of jobs they're hiring for or internships, or just ask about how it's like working there. So even if you don't plan, you're not sure if you want to attend yet, I recommend checking out the link because it shows the employers who are attending. So you can see who's coming, what positions they're hiring for, and if it's a good spent time of a good time for you to attend. So even if you're not searching, I think it's helpful to attend. Even if you just want to take free professional, it says professional headshots. So like pictures from shoulder and above. So these professional photos could be used for your LinkedIn and other professional means as well. So highly recommend it just to check out. And this is my contact information. I really enjoyed spending time with you all. My name again is Melody Lim. I'm a career specialist at the Career Center. This is my email address, mslim@fullerton.edu. And this is information from the Career Center. So our location, Langsdorff Hall, 208. Our website, which is fullerton.edu/career/ and an Instagram, which is at CSUF Career. You can follow us for more updates on opportunities and workshops we're hosting. And you can also schedule an appointment here. So all these links I'll be sharing with you all in addition to the handout and the PowerPoint at this time.